It's the story of Paddy O'Dwyer. Now, these are a different O'Dwyer. These are the Waterford O'Dwyers, and the Waterford O'Dwyers, even today, they're known for their hard working, their honesty, and their success. Now, Paddy O'Dwyer Sr. started life as a tenant farmer on an Anglo-Irish estate. But he was a very good farmer and a very astute business person. And he realized that his absentee landlord was a bit of a rascal and a spendthrift. So one day he approached him directly and said he wanted to buy his farm when he knew his landlord was in debt. And the landlord, well, he needed ready money and he sold the farm. And after that, well, Paddy O'Dwyer would write to him and would lend him money against the estate in Ireland. And he'd lend it. He didn't want much in the way of interest. It was a reasonable loan. It was a better loan than anyone else perhaps would offer, but he was against the property because Paddy O'Dwyer had a plan. And every now and again, when a debt would come due, he would say, well, what about this field or what about this farm? Starting always with sort of troublesome bits of land, a bit of woodland that wasn't much good, or some land that was a bit boggy, or some cottages that needed repair. And slowly, bit by bit, it got to so all that was left was the great house in the park. Now, Paddy O'Dwyer had no interest in the house in the park, but he also didn't really like the English. So he lent more money, and finally he owned the house in the park. Well, he didn't want this great big grand house, so he knocked it down. And he thought one thing would spite the English even more, and he turned the grand park into potato fields. Now, Paddy O'Dwyer had only one son. He used to say it was because it was better to have one son properly brought up, and it was also easier to provide for one son than have 15 or 20. But truth be told, he only had the one because that was the only one that God had given him. Now, the son was not at all like the father, really. The son, all he liked to do was to go to parties, to go to races, to run after pretty girls, and to have a nice time. And people would be forever telling the father that he must reining in and complaining, your son's not like you. He's not like you at all. You need to bring him in. You need to make him work. But the father would just shake his head and say, he's young. He's having a good time. I never had a good time. Let him have a good time. He's an O'Dwyer. He'll come out right in the end. Well, and also, he never asks for that much. Why, he has 20 guineas, but what's 20 guineas? He never gets into debt like those English are. It's all right. He's got a nice horse, but he's not always asking me for a nicer horse. And we can afford it. What matters it? What matters it at all? Well, all was fine until one day he heard Paddy O'Dwyer had been a little bit naughty. Now, Paddy O'Dwyer had a sweetheart called Mary, and Mary was the daughter of Paddy O'Dwyer Sr.'s best friend. And they'd grown up together. And it had always been kind of understood that they would certainly wished for that they would be getting married one day. Well, But what Paddy O'Dwyer heard about his son did not please him. It made him furious. It was all right to have these dalliances with barmaids and peasant girls a little while away, but to do this and to do what he had done, if he heard it, well, he called Paddy O'Dwyer in to see him, and he was furious. He told him that if he did not marry Mary that week, then he would be kicked out without a penny and he would never set eye on him again. Now, Paddy O'Dwyer liked Mary well enough. And Paddy O'Dwyer probably would marry her anyway, and would probably be pretty keen on marrying her, but he didn't want to be told what to do, and also did he want to marry her that week. And he didn't like this anger of his father, but he knew his father was a man of his word. And the father said, listen, Paddy O'Dwyer, you tell me by tomorrow morning whether you're going to marry Mary, and if it's not a yes, I never need to see your face again. Do you hear me? Well, Paddy O'Dwyer stomped out, and he went off to town to have a few drinks. And he went from place to place, feeling grumpy and grumpier, until he'd run out of parties, and he thought perhaps he knew of a little pub in a hidden out-of-the-way place that might still be open, and where there might be a pretty girl behind the bar, or there might not be, and he set off at night. And as he was walking down a road, a lonely road with bog either side, he saw there was a party of people coming his way, and this cheered him up, for they must be out having a good time, and he was sure he could fall in with them and talk to them, and they would probably it would be going the right way as well, because he didn't really want to go away from home. But as they got closer, he saw they were carrying something that looked a bit odd, and as they got closer still, he saw it was a corpse, and he also saw that the people didn't look like people. And he realized with his horror, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he saw it was the good people coming, and they were carrying of a corpse, and they were all about maybe this high. And he stood there rooted to the spot. He looked to left and right, but there was nothing but bog, nowhere to hide and nowhere to run. And this corpse caught up with him, and they surrounded him, and they said, good day, Paddy O'Dwyer. How are you, Paddy O'Dwyer? How frightfully nice to see you, Paddy O'Dwyer, they said. And he saw that they had these noses that came out, and these chins that came up to here, and these little red jackets and these trousers, and he was terrified. Well, Paddy O'Dwyer, we were wondering if you could do us a favour, being as you're so much bigger and stronger than us. You see, we must be taking this corpse to be buried, and could you very, very kindly carry the corpse for us? Paddy O'Dwyer managed to blurt out, I will not. And this all hell broke loose. How horrible, what a rude man you are, Paddy O'Dwyer. We've greeted you, we've been polite, and you've said nothing. What manners, a terrible manners. What a rude man you are, Paddy O'Dwyer. And suddenly he felt his legs kicked from under him, and he was lying face down on the road with his face biting the dirt. And then the corpse, the great cold body, was laid over his back, and the corpse's arms wrapped themselves around his neck. Stand up, Paddy O'Dwyer. Now listen to me. This corpse needs to be buried in hallowed ground before dawn. If this corpse is not buried before dawn, it will take you down to where you do not want to go, and where you will never come out from again. Do you hear me? Now, you take this corpse. You know where the Church of St. Mary Magdalene is? Well, you take this corpse there, and it may be that it doesn't want to be buried there, and it may be that it does. And if it doesn't, you'd better find another church to bury it. When you get there, go into the church. And when you're there, go into the belfry, get a crowbar and a spade and lever out a big paving stone in the center and dig a hole and put the corpse in there. Well, Paddy O'Dwyer sent off. He knew where the church was. It wasn't far, truth be told. And the good people followed behind him, and he got there and he went in, went up, and he noticed the good people didn't come into the churchyard. It didn't surprise him at all. But the corpse still held tightly to him. He got to the door of the church, and it was locked, and he started taking out his knife to see if he could jimmy the door, when he heard a voice. The key is on the shelf behind you. It was the corpse that was speaking. And you can talk, can you? He said. Now and then, said the corpse. Well, the key was there, and he opened the door, and he got the crowbar, and he lifted up the paving stone, and he dug and he dug. And after he'd been digging for a bit, the spade hit something which didn't feel like soil. So he got down and sort of cleared it, and as he was clearing, the corpse of the woman, all rotten and putrid, leapt out, and it pointed a finger at him, and a little bit of decaying flesh came out of the finger, and that the corpse said, "You're not burying that man next to me, Paddy O'Dwyer. Put me back, bury me, and take that corpse away." Well, Paddy O'Dwyer had to do what he was told. And then he left, and now, try as he might, he couldn't really think of any other churches. If it had been a pub or a race course, he'd have known, but churches, it wasn't really, I mean, he'd been to church and probably, quite a few times, but never really paid attention. And he's thinking, well, where's the nearest church? And then the corpse said, "Take me to the church of St. Andrew." "But where is it?" And the corpse pointed down the road, and whenever he got to a crossroad or a turning, an arm would come out and point. It was very tiring carrying this corpse, and he thought he'd sit down and rest, and he sat down, and suddenly he was surrounded by the good people who were a-kicking and a-pummeling him, and he got up, and they kicked and pummeled him, and he had to run to get away from them. And then he got to the church of St. Andrew, and he went through the church gate, the lych gate, but as he entered it, he felt himself seized by unseen hands, and they picked him up and they threw him out, and he realized that this was not the place to bury the corpse either. "Take me to the church of St. Silas the Martyr," said the corpse, and the arm pointed. And he moved and he walked, and he was exhausted and tired, but he had to go, and if he slowed, he felt little kicks behind him. Well, he got to the church, and as he got closer, he saw what looked like they might be people, but they weren't people. Climbing out of the graves were all manner of ghosties and ghoulies, and he thought, are they welcoming the corpse? But no, they weren't. They came to the edge of the churchyard, and they shook their fists at him, and they beckoned, and they waved their arms, and he realized this was not the church either. "Take me to the church of St. James," said the corpse. Now the church of St. James was a good way away, and the night was long, but, well, Paddy O'Dwyer was wondering whether it would be long enough, and he went on with the corpse. and the church of St. James was on a little hill, and it was a clear night, but as he got closer, the sky started to fill with clouds, and they all started to come closer and closer and converge above the church. And they started hitting each other, and there were great thunderclaps. And then as he got closer, there were lightning bolts, and slowly the lightning bolts surrounded the church until there was a great wall of fire. And Paddy O'Dwyer realized that this was not the church. And now he started to be worried, and he swore a mighty oath that if he were to bury the corpse before dawn, he would go home and he would marry Mary, and he would be good for the rest of his life. Well, the corpse said, "Take me to the church of St. Patrick." And it was a lonely ruined church in the middle of the bog. And the churchyard was filled with yews, and he went in to the churchyard. And he went behind a great tree, and he found, as he knew he'd find, a freshly dug grave, and in the grave a coffin. And he opened the coffin, and the arms of the corpse for the first time relaxed. And he placed the corpse in the coffin and buried it. Well, then he went home as fast as he could, and he burst in on his father, and he said, "I'll marry Mary today, I'll marry Mary today." And his father was very pleased, but said, "It'll probably take a few days to arrange." Well, Paddy O'Dwyer didn't leave the house until he was married. And after he was married, he never left the house at night again, and he worked hard for the rest of his life. He didn't have the business genius of his father, but he didn't need it. He looked after the land and the farms and the properties, and he became a richer man than his father, rich enough to settle all his 17 children, for he loved his wife Mary very much, and of course there hadn't been much to do in those long evenings. And that really is the end. And I hope you're all tucked up in bed, curled up nice and warm, and your eyes are closed. You're taking deep breaths. And you are, I think, yes, you are. I can see now. You're all asleep. I'm just going to give you a little kiss. Good night.